what you see is sometimes not what you get. It had been another intense day in school, and Carla was ready to tell it all to Ed, the boy next door, only to find him missing. She searched high and low but didn't find him. But what she did find sent a chill down her spine. Today, your challenge is to separate what is true from what is false. 5 stories, some real, some fake. You'll find out about a boy who is neither dead nor alive, a creepy sleepover, whisperings of a demon-like creature, a peculiar handyman, and a girl who is helped by her dead grandfather. Can you judge which are fact and which are fiction? Brace yourself for a journey into the unknown, a journey to be revealed. And we'll start with the story of the boy next door. Carla had always wondered about the building next door, why it was empty and why no one seemed to want it. One day, she saw a flicker of light in the building and what seemed like the shadow of a boy her age walking past. This further increased her curiosity, and she began looking out for the boy. Days passed, and she didn't see the lights again, and she became almost sure she had imagined it all, until one day, everything changed. On one cold winter evening, Carla was returning from a study session when she ran into a strangely dressed boy at her doorstep. He was thinly dressed and looked like he'd stepped out of her 70s movie. He introduced himself as Ed and explained that he needed something to keep him warm for the night because he lived in the building next door. Carla was excited to finally meet him, and that was the beginning of what seemed like a wonderful friendship. She didn't tell anyone about him due to the fear of someone chasing him away for illegal occupancy, and he made sure to see her at only odd hours. But one day, Ed vanished. Carla had returned from school and was excited to tell him how her day went. But when she got to the house, he wasn't there. There was no goodbye note or a number to call. However, she noticed something strange. Neatly folded in a corner was the cloth he was always wearing alongside every other few belongings he had. This was strange because he wouldn't have relocated without his properties. Worried for his safety, she began asking everyone about him, but no one knew who he was. The absurdity of it all kept Carla up at night, so she returned to the house to search for answers. As she entered the dark building that night, she started to hear a voice. It sounded familiar. It was Ed's voice, in a much creepier tone. Carla became frightened, but her will to find her new friend would keep her following his voice. As she entered what seemed to be a boy's room, suddenly the voice disappeared. She then found a picture of Ed on the bed with the words, "In loving memory of Edward Burrell, 1979, written on it. But the year at the time was 1999. If you think that's strange, you should also hear this. The sleepover. There was a new girl in school with a cool name, Summer, and everyone wanted to be friends with her. So when LaToya got invited to her sleepover birthday party, along with 6 other girls, she was beyond thrilled. On the day of the party, Summer's mother picked all the girls up in a rickety old van and drove them to their home. The house was an old building on a huge lot. There were 2 little outbuildings on the property, a shed, and an old outhouse. These details are important because LaToya remembered laughing about the outhouse, since there was no reason for it to exist. Yes, this was in the late 70s, but indoor plumbing already existed. Summer had a little sister named Autumn, who was about 3, and the girls all joked about their names, saying if her mom had another kid, would it be Winter? The party went by in a haze, but what stood out was the promise LaToya and the other girls made to Summer to be her best friends forever. This was after hearing about the struggle Summer faced due to her family moving around a lot. The next day, her mom took them all home. On Monday, LaToya was ready to resume her best friend duties, but didn't see Summer. She asked a friend who had also been at the sleepover if she had seen Summer, but no one had seen her, and they concluded that she might be sick. A few days went by, and no Summer. LaToya became really worried and asked one of the girls who had been at the party if she had seen our new friend. She looked at her in puzzlement and said, "Summer? I don't know anyone named Summer." This got LaToya really mad. Because didn't they all promise to be her new best friend? How fickle could they be to go back on their promise so quickly? A few days later, Latoya was in the car with her mom, and they drove by the street where Summer lived. She began to point out Summer's home when she realized there was no house there, no greenhouse, no outbuildings, nothing but a field of grass. She tried convincing her mother that a house had stood there a week ago, but it was pointless, as there was no rubble, no sign of a house. Since none of the parents had dropped off or picked up their daughters, there was no one to confirm the house's existence. And aside from Latoya and that one friend, no one else acknowledged that they had been there. No one at school remembered ever knowing Summer. Do you believe Summer was a figment of Latoya's imagination? Let's go over to a boy who also experienced something similar. The voice. Sheldon was 4 years old when his parents built their dream home on 2.5 acres of land off the beaten path. There were other houses nearby, but it was a very spacious area, mixed in with a few farmhouses. Sheldon was a very imaginative kid, and he preferred playing alone. Solitude meant that Sheldon could be very imaginative and could come up with very wild stories. That's why everyone found it hard to believe him when this incident happened. The back acre of their yard was nothing but woods of mostly pine, and he would often play in the woods until dark, never after dark. One night, he got so engrossed while playing in the woods that he didn't notice the sun going down through the trees until he heard his name being called from the direction of the house. Sheldon panicked because it was quite late and ran to the front door. As he entered the house, he expected to immediately see his mom, who had called him, but the kitchen and living room were empty. His brother was taking a bath, and his dad was keeping him company. He went down the hall to his parents' room and found his mother playing solitaire on her computer. He apologized for being so late she had to call for him. She looked at him out of confusion because she didn't call for him. That news was unsettling, but Sheldon soon fell asleep, unknown to him that he was about to have the scariest experience ever. The first indication that something was amiss was his falling out of bed onto the floor. That has never happened before. Confused and waking up, he felt his way around, trying to understand what had caused him to fall. And what happened next is beyond words. He grabbed a pair of feet. He knew for sure it was a foot because he felt the ankles under his hands and the hair on the legs. He looked up in panic. He saw a creature with yellow eyes, broken, grinning teeth, and claw-like arms wrapped in his grandmother's blanket he slept with. Sheldon screamed with all his might and ran faster than ever to his parents' room. His dad immediately ran into his room to see the reason behind his indescribable terror, but found nothing. His dad searched the whole house and still found nothing. Sheldon moved out of that room and into his brother's the next day, and he never saw the creature again. He would have labeled the incident a figment of his wild imagination, but his grandmother's blanket going missing was enough proof. Do you think Sheldon's blanket going missing was just a coincidence? Let's see if we can say the same for Taylor. The swinging doors. When Taylor was told he was going to finally have a room in their new home, he couldn't be more thrilled. As soon as he got to the new house, he ran to pick up the largest room with the best view. However, the room had strange swinging doors. Since swinging doors could be fixed, Taylor paid it no mind, but he really should have, as that night, he got a shocking surprise. After his parents came to make sure he was comfortable, Taylor was left to enjoy his first night alone. He always had to share rooms with his two brothers, despite moving several times. But just as he was falling asleep, he heard footsteps coming from the direction of his brother's rooms. Thinking it was his brothers, he sat up. However, two strange men walked in instead. They came in chattering about the swinging doors and the effect its noise had on them. One walked up to Taylor and warned him against removing the screws, while the other worked on fixing it. When the door was fixed, they both walked out. It was a strange experience, and initially, Taylor thought it was a dream, but he checked the door and found it fixed. If you find that mind-boggling, what would you think of the next story? Buenos dias. Southeast Texas was hit by a severe tornado that destroyed innumerable buildings, killed 8 people, and left 60 injured. During the search for survivors, The rescue teams sifted through rubble. Suddenly, they heard faint cries coming from the ruins of a house and discovered that a little girl named Luisa was trapped in the basement of the wrecked house. Digging directly down to Luisa could cause a cave-in, so the team had to dig to her at an angle, which was more time-consuming and further put Luisa at risk. As the team worked on getting to Luisa, Skip, the team lead, conversed with her and discovered that she had a head injury that may have caused a concussion. Skip became worried that Luisa may pass out and fall into a coma if his team did not get to her in time, so he tried to keep conversing with her to keep her awake. During this small talk, Luisa mentioned that her beloved grandfather, who Skip learned was one of the fatalities of the tornado, would wake her every morning by saying, "Buenos dias, Luisa." Exhausted from being under the building for so long, Luisa began to fall unconscious despite the conversation, and a voice that sounded like her deceased grandfather began chanting, "Buenos dias, Luisa." This chanting continued long enough to keep Luisa awake until she was rescued by Skip's team. As Luisa was being loaded into the ambulance, she began asking about her grandfather. But before Skip could say anything, a parrot, which Luisa recognized as her grandfather's, hopped into view and squawked, "Buenos dias, Luisa." The parrot, and not a ghost, was revealed to have been the source of the voice that kept Luisa conscious. Let's reveal which stories are fact and which are fiction. Could you separate what is true from what is false? What do you think about Carla, who met Ed, the boy who had died 20 years ago, but was still able to get in contact and befriend her? Could such an event have really happened? Unfortunately, this story is made up. It's fiction and never took place. However, the second story about the girls' sleepover is a totally different ballgame. It might seem fictional, but it is very much a fact. Summer suddenly vanished into thin air, and there has been no valid explanation for it. What about the story with the 4-year-old boy named Sheldon and his missing blanket? Did a demon-like creature really take it away from him? To our surprise, this story is also fact. It did happen. A creature like that is hard to imagine, but what explanation is there for the missing blanket? Let's move to the next story. The swinging door and this odd appearance of 2 men fixing it looks confusing. In fact, this story is fiction. There are no swinging doors, no Sheldon, and no ghost handyman. Not that we know of, anyway. Do you remember Luisa, the girl that was trapped in the basement of a wrecked house? If you expect this story to be true, then we will not leave you disappointed. A tornado did wreck Luisa's home, and her dead grandfather's voice was the major reason she stayed alive. Only that it wasn't her grandfather's voice she was hearing.